Hello there and welcome to this episode of BFG Reviews. As always, I want to start by sincerely saying thanks to anyone that's watched my previous videos and remind everyone to please like, share, and subscribe. Now, on to this week's review, which is...
Hey! I told you to take that jacket off.
You'd have to kill me to get this jacket off. Some people would rather crash than slow down.
The Bikeriders. Written and directed by Jeff Nichols and starring Jodie Comer as Kathleen, Austin Butler as Benny, Mike Faist as Danny, and Tom Hardy as Johnny. Based on the book of the same name by Danny Lyon, The Bikeriders follows Comer's Kathy. After a chance encounter with the Vandals, she is inexplicably attracted to the motorcycle club's newest member, Benny. And despite being under the sturdy leadership of Hardy's Johnny, the club begins to transform from a community for local outsiders into a dangerous and violent gang, forcing Butler's Benny to choose between a life with Kathy or riding with and potentially leading the Vandals. So, before getting into my thoughts on the film, I want to discuss the film's marketing. Or lack thereof. Unless you're someone that keeps up with film industry news, you probably had no idea that The Bikeriders was a recently released film. Even if you did happen to catch a trailer, you were sold a love triangle between Benny, Kathy, and Johnny / riding itself. And while that is certainly a part of the film, I wouldn't say it was the focus. I don't entirely blame the marketing team though, because The Bikeriders is a somewhat unfocused film. The main drive of the film is the club itself, watching it grow from its inception into a place where outcasts can find a sense of community, and then transform into a threatening and criminal gang. And it uses Benny and Kathleen's tumultuous relationship as more of a framing device rather than what actually drives the plot, which normally I wouldn't mind, as I very much enjoyed what the relationship was framing, but I just didn't care for the relationship itself. Before I go any further, I want to be clear. Even though these characters are based on real people, any criticism is solely directed at the fictional characters themselves, and not the people they were based on. That being said, I really didn't like Benny or Kathy, and I didn't understand why they stayed together. Benny is just someone who avoids responsibility at every turn in the name of so-called freedom. And in the end, doesn't really choose between Kathy or the club, but waits until the choice is made for him. And Kathy is barely a character. She mostly talks about how much she's changed since meeting Benny and the Vandals, but because we're not really shown what she was like before this, it just feels hollow. Their initial attraction somewhat comes from Benny being one of the few Vandals to not immediately grope Kathy, and the fact that he stalks her until her boyfriend decides to leave. And we're almost never shown them happy together, so I find it incredibly difficult to care about what happens to either of them, much less them as a couple. When the film decides to focus on Johnny and the rest of the club, I do find it much more engaging. We're shown the history of the club, why Johnny started it, and how hard he works to retain respect and keep the peace. And the film has a great cast of memorable side characters, including Cockroach, Brucey, Wahoo and Corky, Zipco, and Cal, most of which are more developed than Kathy or Benny, even with their limited screen time. The unfocused nature of The Bikeriders is honestly upsetting because of how technically brilliant the film is. The cinematography is beautiful and the sound design is near perfect, which is especially important given the subject of the film. Also, everyone gives an amazing performance. Austin Butler gives a very subtle yet explosive performance, and Jodie Comer puts on a wonderful Midwestern accent that, while a bit silly at times, is always taken seriously. And then there's Tom Hardy. His performance as a soft-spoken yet direct Johnny is further evidence of his talent. To me, Johnny is the true lead of the film. It's his struggle to keep the Vandals from changing that mirrors the message of the film. That there are some things you just can't control, even when you try your hardest. And I think by giving Benny and Kathy's detached relationship so much focus that it frames the film, actually takes away from this message. Because in the end, while The Bikeriders, when focused on the Bikeriders, is an interesting film that explores the nature of change, the relationship that most of the limited marketing was based on wasn't developed enough for me to care. Which is why I believe The Bikeriders earns a B- letter grade. And I suggest you see this film in theaters if you're a fan of technically well-made films or riding motorcycles. So, those are my thoughts on The Bikeriders. Let me know your thoughts on the film, or if you've even heard of it, in the comment section down below, as well as your thoughts on my art, or what other films you'd like me to review. Thanks everyone, make sure you hit that like button, and I hope you have an exhilarating day.